In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is Common Sense. This week on Common Sense, Gary Morse drops by to explain what is wrong with RhodeMap Rhode Island. Elizabeth Smith and Luis Vargas catch us up on the news. Jeff Richard talks about the IRS, and of course we ask the question, are you kidding me? Let's get started with the news.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Smith.
And I'm Luis Vargas.
And together we're reporting for Common Sense. In the latest news on the paw stalks, the Providence Journal has reported that the new financial proposal for the potential paw stalks move to Providence has been released. Rhode Island taxpayers would be asked to contribute up to $120 million over 30 years to support an $85 million ballpark and parking garage that the new paw stalks owners want to build on 9.5 acres in the capital city. In addition, the new investment group that owns the AAA ball team is asking the city of Providence to waive all city real estate taxes for 30 years and change city zoning so the ballpark is permitted use on the site. Lawyer James J. Skeffington, Paw Stalks president and principal owner of the team, said Wednesday the owners will ask the state legislators to authorize state payments of $5 million a year for 30 years to lease the ballpark from the team owners. But the owners would then pay the state $1 million to sublease the stadium back. That would require taxpayers to pay up to $4 million a year over 30 years, totaling up to $120 million. The Journal goes on to further explain that the $120 million would be reduced by an anticipated $2 million a year in state sales income and hotel taxes from people visiting, playing, or working at the ballpark, Skeffington estimated. Skeffington briefed reporters Wednesday about the proposal. He said the team would pay $70 million to build the stadium, $5 million to relocate the Narragansett Bay Commission and National Grid utilities, and $10 million to cover its share of a 750-car parking garage. The team would co-own that garage and share its revenue with the developer of a nearby South Street Landing project.
In the latest news on campaign finance, the Journal has reported that the full House on Tuesday approved 2 of 3 bills aimed at plugging some of the loopholes that allowed former House Speaker Gordon D. Fox to loot his campaign fund, undetected for years, to pay more than $100,000 in personal expenses. The House approved a leadership bill to ban the commingling of personal and campaign dollars, and require all candidates and office holders to provide end-of-year bank statements for these accounts to the Board of Elections. The Journal went on further to explain that the bank statements would not be public. A third bill in the package would ban a politician who raises or spends at least $10,000 from serving as his or her own campaign treasurer, but it was held for a day. The House bills were introduced in the days after Fox pleaded guilty on March 3rd in federal court to bribery, wire fraud, and filing false tax returns. Under a plea agreement with Fox, prosecutors have recommended that he serve 3 years in prison.
Now let's make our way to the State House as we meet with representatives and senators in the Republican caucus to see what they're working on. Here's who we met with this week.
And I'm here at the Rhode Island State House with Representative Blake Filippi. Blake, instant runoffs. What are they and what are you doing to work on them?
So an instant runoff election is when you have more than 2 candidates running, you would mark your first and second choice on the ballot. What we have now in Rhode Island, we have a plurality system. And that's where whoever gets the most votes wins, regardless if they hit the 50 plus 1% threshold. In instant runoff voting, you would mark your first and second choice, and if no one gets above 50% in the first round, the candidate with the least first choices is eliminated, and his or her votes are apportioned to the remaining candidates based on the voter's second choice. It allows a system of runoff voting with doing one election without the delay and the cost of having a second election. It's extremely effective. It works throughout the world in numerous countries and in 20 different major U.S. cities.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Luis Vargas, and I'm here at the Rhode Island State House with Representative Michael Chippendale. Mike, there was a RhodeMap RI hearing last week in House Oversight. Could you summarize that hearing for us?
Sure, yes. We had Kevin Flynn, who's the Associate Director of the Division of Planning, in. We were hoping to get some answers relative to the RhodeMap Rhode Island plan's ability to impact cities and towns in a mandatory fashion. Regrettably, we weren't able to get really very many answers out of Mr. Flynn. I personally, as the co-chair and a member of the committee, found it extremely difficult to get a straight answer. It was a lot like playing dodgeball, in my opinion, to use a sports analogy. But Mr. Flynn's answers weren't satisfactory to my level of what I expected, and later I spoke with the members of the committee and they agreed. So we're going to go at it again.
Hi, I'm Luis Vargas, and I'm here at the Rhode Island State House with Senator Mark G. Now, last night there was a hearing about 2 bills relating to the Ethics Commission. Could you tell us what those bills were and maybe summarize the hearing for us?
Yes, I can, Louis. Thank you. There were 2 bills. One was numbered Senate Bill 56 and the other Senate Bill 173, and they both dealt with ethics reform, although each one of them dealt with the issue in a different way. I was very interested to hear Ed O'Neill's bill, which is the bill that is supported by Common Cause and Operation Clean Government, and the other bill, which has appeal for a lot of legislators because they feel that it gives them protection that they need in order to conduct business. So it was very interesting. It was an educational experience for me and a learning experience, and I'm going to take that forward, hopefully, and use it to promote good ethics reform.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now an update on some common sense legislation. Representatives Morgan, Lancia, Riley, Giarrusso, and Ardolillo introduced a bill back in January that was heard this past week by the House Committee on Judiciary. It centers around retailers and EBT customer transactions. House Bill 5249 requires retailers to examine a photo ID to verify that a buyer presenting an EBT card is entitled to use the card. It further provides that a retailer who neglects to perform such verification shall be suspended from the program for 1 month. In a separate and unrelated bill, House Bill 5250 requires retailers to examine a photo ID to verify that a buyer presenting an EBT card is entitled to use the card. It further provides that a retailer who neglects to perform such verification shall also be suspended from the program for 1 month. After consideration, these 2 common sense bills were held for further study, thus demonstrating again the need for more conservatives on Smith Hill to combat those who hold for further study.
And now for a way to help garner one more conservative on Smith Hill. House Seat 33 was vacated when Donald J. Lally Jr. announced his resignation on March 16th of this year. Bob Traeger, a Republican and a resident of South Kingstown, has entered the race. He's a local small businessman. He says, "I'm excited for the opportunity to run in House District 33." In a statement, "Our district deserves a strong voice," said Traeger, "and someone who understands the economic challenges that we all face." He went on further to say that my training and education as an engineer and my broad work experience in fisheries and home remodeling provides me with an excellent view of our state's economic health and distinguish me from my opponents. I promise to bring integrity and the requisite energy and tenacity to the State House to ensure the people who live and work in District 33 have a voice, and to help chart a course toward a brighter future for them and their children. We at Common Sense encourage you to help Bob Traeger in any way that you can. Simply go to his Facebook page at Robert Traeger for State Representative District 33. There you'll see how you can help with his campaign. No matter where you live in Rhode Island, you can contribute, whether with donations and or assisting him in this very important House race that's fast approaching on Tuesday, June 9th. We'll be providing campaign updates right here on Common Sense.
Finally, according to WPRI, the troubled Central Company Fire District has a new plan to help it emerge from bankruptcy. Board members officially announced the 5-year plan at a meeting Wednesday night, which they said makes revolutionary changes. But opponents said the proposed deal is not a good one for taxpayers. The changes come in 5 areas: platoon structure, overtime, staffing, health insurance, and retirement benefits. There's also a tax levy increase of 2% per year over the course of the agreement. One more meeting will be held to go over the details of the new agreement before it's presented in front of the bankruptcy court for its approval. Now here's some inside baseball. Speaker Mattiello or someone on his staff posted the hearing notice in the wrong location on the Secretary of State's website. Coincidence or error? We'll never know. Then the judge hearing the case placed a notice for the hearing on the side of the door where no one could see it. The placement was legal, just not visible. Proof positive, the cover-up and assault on taxpayers of Central Coventry continues.
That's it for the news this week. Now, let's meet with this week's special guest.
Did our legislature just get off on regulating everything? Are you kidding me? Senate Bill 334 establishes a licensing procedure and licensing requirement for auto glass replacement professionals. How have we managed to safely use automobiles for more than a century without this measure? Senators De Palma, Lombardo, Chacon, and Goodwin are now stepping into the breach to correct this egregious oversight. We asked the senators about the need for this new regulation, and here's their reaction. How does this even begin to be a good idea? Look, machinists who turn out critical parts for nuclear submarines out at Quonset don't need state licenses. Do you think this new bill would be more about restraint of trade than the safety of the public? Do you think there's a small group of auto glass shops that want to make it harder for you and me to compete with them? Do you think the bill's sponsors see an opportunity to expand the state's bureaucratic empire? Where do you think we are? Rhode Island? Are you kidding me?
Today we're going to be talking about RhodeMap Rhode Island. I'm sure most of you have heard about the controversy. This is a plan that is supposed to be an economic development plan for Rhode Island. Our economy is in trouble, has been in trouble now for a good number of years, 7 or 8 years. We seem to still be scraping the bottom and running on empty. And when we started looking at this a couple of years ago, we thought that we should come together and have a plan, an economic development plan. Governor Chafee endorsed RhodeMap Rhode Island. And there's a controversy about it, and to help us understand that controversy, we have Gary Morse, who is a retired communications consultant who has really put a lot of time and energy into understanding RhodeMap Rhode Island and the HUD regulations and all the things that are the underbelly or the insides, the guts of this RhodeMap Rhode Island. And you found some things that that I think our viewers should know about so that they can make a decision for themselves. So first of all, let me know, what is RhodeMap Rhode Island?
Well, you have to think of RhodeMap in two parts. There's the economic development portion, and then there's the housing portion. Economic development being that good plans like pad-ready sites, but the housing portion is more statutorily defined, and local municipalities must be compliant to the RhodeMap plan, and they don't have any choice on it. So economic development, you've got some choice and leeway. Housing portion, no choice, no leeway.
Okay, and it's the housing portion that you think citizens should be concerned about.
Very concerned. It entails deconstruction of the neighborhoods that you know. It's effectively a path that's been defined by HUD as to the fairness of how housing should be. So if you own a single-family house, for example, HUD has made clear that single-family housing is not compliant to HUD's livability principles, and single-family neighborhoods need to be modified and deconstructed as we know them. So 300 years of organic growth of our neighborhoods in New England is, in HUD's mind, bad and needs to be deconstructed.
Okay, so let me clarify this. HUD has livability standards, which are now built into RhodeMap Rhode Island. And those standards say that we should get rid of single-family homes or single-family home neighborhoods. They want to introduce low-income housing, high-rises into single-family home communities.
Well, in order to figure out really what HUD's mind is these days, you have to look at what happened in Westchester County, New York, because that lawsuit that was filed in Westchester County outlines all of HUD's plans for the entire nation. It was the first such lawsuit. In 2009, HUD developed the settlement agreement between Westchester County and HUD and the court, and it clearly lays out the path that HUD wants for Westchester County, which is to start implementing low-income housing in some of the most upscale neighborhoods of Scarsdale, Bedford Hills, which HUD admittedly hasn't looked at the impact of property values or the tax base, property taxes themselves.
Okay, I think you're getting ahead of our viewers a little bit. So let's kind of go back to the beginning and talk about it's the economic development portion of RhodeMap Rhode Island is general suggestions.
Yes.
It's a good way to suggest that. So we should have an industrial park. We should have pad-ready sites. We should maybe work on making the process more streamlined. That's the economic development plan. Just
Common sense things.
common sense things, but no timeline, no, this is what you should do. These regulations should be abolished. They should be changed. We should do nothing like that. Nothing concrete.
Nothing that says here's your cost benefit analysis, therefore start spending money over here to do this, and this will attract certain. None of that is in the economic plan. It's generalized experiments that might take place to help economic development. Again, common sense things that probably didn't need roadmap.
But no funding stream, no cost benefit analysis, no real concrete. This needs to be done if we're going to get jobs back into Rhode Island.
Correct. There is none of the hard data that you need in order to carry out such an economic development plan.
But that's what the legislature asked for.
And that's what the legislature should have demanded when RhodeMap was in its final stages, except that the planning division didn't go back and do benchmarks and say to the legislature, are we in the right ballpark here? It was thrust all of a sudden upon the communities to say, this is what we came up with, who cares about what the legislature thinks?
Well, and I can tell you, we were busy running our campaigns. I was busy all summer long. I didn't even realize that this was coming up for a vote until the campaign was over. There had been no updates, no talk about it. It was so poorly advertised or communicated to the people in Rhode Island. I understand they had some neighborhood meetings for people to attend, but they attended themselves. I don't think anybody from the communities attended, right?
Well, you might almost come to the conclusion that not even the Division of Planning understood what they were doing. And it's clear now, as they're holding hearings after the fact, that the Planning Division is getting so much information wrong. They've said there are no mandates in this, there are no law changes, and that is absolutely not true.
All right, but what they didn't give us was an economic development plan.
That's correct.
And that's what the people of Rhode Island need more than anything else right now. We don't have the jobs. I just saw that Len Ladaro put out another op-ed this last weekend talking about we're doing things wrong here. We have structural issues that need to be addressed, but it wasn't addressed in this plan at all.
Well, the plan has the fault of trying to equate economic development with fairness. And as any businessman will tell you, if you put fairness first and foremost as your goal, you're not going to get anywhere. So that's part of the problem, is the benchmark that's being used for RhodeMap is all about equity and fairness.
Fairness in housing.
Well, no, even in economic development, that businesses that go into growth centers will be required to have certain, quality of life, certain standards by which they have to run their business. And I don't know any business that would sign up for that kind of a commitment.
Okay, so you talk about this being a housing plan and that there are growth centers. This is a new word. There's livability principles. It's the HUD, Principles of Sustainable Communities. That sounds like a really nice thing to have, quite frankly. They've made these growth centers, which makes you think that companies are going to flock to them and they're going to be creating jobs in these growth centers. You're saying not so fast?
Well, let's look at what the outcome would be. This plan will increase property taxes. It will decrease property values for most neighborhoods. I don't know how that's attracting business. That's sort of a smoke signal to business to stay away. I don't know any business that would want to go to a place that has on its roadmap, let's decrease property values and increase property taxes.
Okay. Explain to me how this plan decreases property values and therefore decreases or what's the word? I'm trying to it makes the tax base less vigorous, or it erodes the tax base.
Well, it's clear that people, when they make a decision to purchase a home, it's all about location, location, location. And everybody knows the rule. You go searching for the best neighborhood that you feel comfortable in.
What you've been able to earn.
Everybody does that. If you've earned a lot and you're willing to take on a large mortgage, then you can buy a better house in a better neighborhood. You are free to choose. What the roadmap proponents are saying is that is unfair, that your freedom of choice to buy in the neighborhood you select has to have more social responsibility with it. In other words, you should be planning your neighborhood choice where there is low-income housing mixed with upscale housing. And this is the problem. Most people, if you said you must make a choice to live next to low-income rental housing, most people would say, well, it's a nice idea, except that I would prefer to have a very quiet neighborhood with, people who have land around their house, and this is my personal choice.
Well, to me, the American dream has always been you can start out with nothing, and you work hard. You start at that first job, and then you get the raise, and then you get the promotion. You might get a starter home at that point because you've saved for it. You've got a starter home. And as you go through your career and get more promotions, save more money, get some equity in your house, you can move up to a better house if you want. You can stay in the starter house or go to a better house. But it's something that you've earned. That's the American dream. You can take your sweat, your work, your effort, and you can earn something. And that something for a lot of people is a home. I'm a financial advisor, I think you know that, and most people's wealth, their biggest asset is their home. After 30 years, they own it, and that's where their wealth is. They can use that to fund their retirement, but that's their wealth. That's one of the American dreams.
It is, and if you look at most every community, what you would find is that even in places like East Greenwich, Barrington, there's a segment of houses that are very low cost, entry-level homes.
Sure.
We have them in Barrington selling for $150,000.
Yeah.
They need some work. They need painting, some plasterboard here and there. People are willing to go in, do that work with the intent that eventually they'll sell, move up to the next house, and eventually by the time you're in your 50s, you've worked up to that neighborhood you really want. That is the American dream. So why do we need to deconstruct that? Well, that's what RhodeMap is proposing. We deconstruct
So
that.
they want to trample on the American dream.
Yes, they believe that the American dream is in fact responsible for all the social ills that we have in America today.
Well, I disagree with that, but we're going to take a break right now because they're going to do an Are You Kidding Me segment.
Did you know that your state legislature expects you to exert complete control over the forces of nature? Are you kidding me? It's right here in black and white. Senate Bill 333, sponsored by Senators Chacon, McCaffrey, Phelag, and Walaska, stipulates a $500 fine for any property owner who permits plant material from trees and shrubs on their land to enter an abutting lot. I said abutting. The vicious criminals! Wind and rain notwithstanding. If this silliness becomes law, you better be ready to supersede Mother Nature next fall. Before you know it, we'll all need to build a 5,000-foot-high fence surrounding our properties. I can think of a better place for that. But I digress. Since the bill's language specifically cites abutting properties, it seems like you'll be okay if you gather up all your leaves and shrub clippings for transport down the street to some non-abutting lot. Keep that in mind when the leaves start to turn. For now, the production staff here at Common Sense is trying to determine which of the 4 senators of this bill has an axe to grind with his neighbor. Please, senators, just leave us alone. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. We're talking with Barry Morse today about RhodeMap Rhode Island, which was supposed to be an economic development plan and instead seems to be a plan that's about housing and more of concern about changing what the American dream is.
Yes. The documents in RhodeMap, in fact, you can go through the RhodeMap document and actually find these quotes, that single-family housing has actually been part of the problem in the course of American history, that this allowed people the choice to go out and buy in the neighborhood that they want and, quote, escape the urban areas. And they're looking at it as if it was an escape mechanism, not as something that actually helped the prosperity of America.
The people earned the right to choose the house that they wanted to live in. I think that's really of concern. Now, you said in Westchester they got involved with HUD over this, that they actually took money from HUD to build low-income housing. and they wanted to build it on land that was affordable,
Yes.
more affordable. But HUD told them, nope, we want you to build it in the $1 million neighborhoods.
Correct. Most people don't realize that the housing rules have been in place since 1968, but they were never enforced. And so for the last 45 years or so, HUD has been handing out money and never enforcing its own rules. And in 2006, a lawsuit was filed against the county of Westchester on a basis that you took the money.
For the people who are watching, Westchester County is in New York City, or it's on the outskirts of New York City,
Yes.
kind of on the North Shore. It's a very upscale neighborhood. A lot of executives from New York commute in and out of New York City. So it's got a lot of very, very expensive homes on the Sound. People who have earned the right to have those very expensive homes.
Well, some interesting people live there. Bill and Hillary Clinton live in Westchester. Governor Cuomo lives in Westchester. Martha
It's a nice
Stewart.
area.
It's a nice area, yes.
All right, but that being said, Westchester County did want to build some very nice low-income housing.
And they did. And so the choice was to look for where they could get the most bang for the buck.
Sure, where
And
the land is
Where
cheaper.
the land is inexpensive and where it would serve the people the best with the most number of units that they could build.
Sure.
But the lawsuit said that Westchester didn't understand the rules of HUD, which is that they had to affirmatively further fair housing. And by affirmatively furthering fair housing, that Westchester officials were required to go out, count the number of minorities in each census tract throughout Westchester, and wherever there was a low count, that's where you had to start implementing low-income housing. Now, that turned out to be the $1 million neighborhoods of Scarsdale, Bedford
Right on
Hills.
the Sound, on Long Island Sound.
Waterfront property, yes.
So very expensive land, which would make whatever you built there much more expensive. And also then, if you have a high-rise next to your $1 million house, I would imagine it has some effect on your property values.
Absolutely. And those studies have been done and made clear that those neighborhoods that were upscale $1 million neighborhoods that had this kind of integration lost property value. But HUD doesn't care about that issue, and they haven't studied it.
However, the tax man cares about it, doesn't he?
Yes. And we have our own example of what happens in the city of Woonsocket. The city of Woonsocket for the last 20 years has been taking HUD money to build low-income housing. That low-income housing was paying a fraction of the taxes, the local property taxes, that the regular housing was paying. And eventually, around 2011, Woonsocket officials knew that their tax base had collapsed.
It has eroded, yes.
Yes.
They have. It's one of the sad things about Woonsocket is they have so much of the Section 8 housing, and that doesn't pay full property value. I mean, the full property tax. Do you know the percentage that it pays? Is it about a third?
Well, to give you an example, I've done the analysis in most of the communities, and if you take a place like Woonsocket, it's about 1/5 what the average taxpayer would pay. If you go to a place like Barrington, it could be as low as 1/10 what the average taxpayer
All right, so I know just from reading in the paper, I think it was in Go Local Prov actually, that Woonsocket has the highest tax rate in the state. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there's so much HUD housing there that pays, as you say, about 1/5 of what the single-family homeowners pay, that they're having to make up the difference for all the services.
The kids have to go to the same schools.
The garbage is still picked
yes.
up, the police and the fire and everything still is servicing everybody, but the people who are shouldering the burden of that, the tax burden of that, is the single-family homeowners.
Yes, and this is one of the problems of RhodeMap, is they never did that analysis to say what happens to the local property taxes when you start implementing these policies.
So let's go back to Westchester, though. You said that Westchester was sued. Are they having to build high-rises down on the water?
Well, this is what HUD is demanding. They've been resisting and making the arguments, the very arguments we're talking about here, that you're going to destroy the property tax base, and that doesn't help anyone in any of the communities. But HUD has said, no, you don't understand. This is our objective, is to
Bring social fairness to housing.
fairness. Yes. If there are rich people living on the waterfront, then poor people have the exact opportunity in HUD's mind that they should be living on the waterfront as well.
But they can if they work for it.
Well,
I mean, you work, you save, you get a good job, you start a company, whatever. You can. Anybody can buy in those neighborhoods. You have to work for it first.
If you work for it, but HUD's view is that it should be by right, that just because you're poor, and you can't afford waterfront, that should not deny you from being able to live in those areas. And this has been made clear in the HUD documents sent to Westchester officials that this is the end game, that this is what HUD wants for Westchester County, is complete social equity where everybody lives and commingles in the same million-dollar neighborhoods.
All right, so that could really affect many neighborhoods in Rhode Island. Obviously, we have some really nice areas, nice towns and stuff. It could also hurt middle-class neighborhoods as well, those that are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes. It doesn't have to be million-dollar homes. It could be anywhere that HUD says we want affordable housing here in this neighborhood, correct?
Well, let's use a specific example. Let's say that there was an upscale neighborhood with million-dollar homes in any of the communities, East Greenwich, Barrington, Bristol, and low-income housing was forced into that particular neighborhood. And this is, of course, what HUD wants. Well, the tax base suddenly gets hit because those million-dollar homes are very often paying half of the cost of the municipality. So suddenly, if you destroy that upper income tax base, you have to push the property taxes down to the middle houses, even though they may not even have low income.
Well, and I understand that yeah, the ones that are being affected, they're going to pay less taxes, so everybody else has to pay more. But what if there's not property and there's no available space in the million-dollar neighborhoods? Well, there might be space in the $300,000 and $400,000 neighborhoods, and they could just as easily choose that. So nobody is immune. No neighborhood is immune.
No neighborhood is immune, but HUD has laid out, and they did lay this out in the Westchester Settlement Agreement.
They prefer the million-dollar neighborhoods.
Well, not that they prefer, that they're demanding in the Westchester Settlement that the implementation start in those neighborhoods. So the most upscale neighborhoods...
But it can go anywhere, and people should be really concerned that you may think it's only Taylor Swift, but it could be your neighborhood too. We're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back after we do an Are You Kidding segment.
Are you kidding me? Rhode Island State Senate Bill 0058 is a bill to allow bake sales to be held at polling places on Election Day. Now, last year was calamari as a state appetizer. Although the state ranks near the bottom of most economic indicators like unemployment and business climate, our state senators are focused on spending time on something like bake sales on Election Day. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense. We're talking today with Gary Morse, who has been delving into RhodeMap Rhode Island and has come up with some very worrisome parts or ramifications of this plan that was passed by our Rhode Island Planning Council. Gary, we were talking just in the last segment about the fact that HUD is demanding that low-income housing go into all kinds of neighborhoods. They prefer right now the high-income neighborhoods. It could be the middle-income neighborhoods, but they're demanding it goes into that. And one of the tools that they can use to force that is eminent domain. Is that right?
Yes. There's a document that was signed by Kevin Flynn, Division of Planning, that said that every community in Rhode Island under the housing plan would adopt HUD's livability principles. So that contract was signed with HUD that we would do that. Now, under Rhode Island law, each of the municipalities must follow what's in the state guide plan. That's Rhode Island law. That's not optional. So if there was a development that was needed to, quote, do socially proper development.
Livability standards.
It's questionable about whether any property could be protected, and I include conservation land in that as well. So, for example, in East Greenwich or Barrington or North Kingston, there could be a focus on we must get growth in these centers, so that nice little piece of conservation land over there, we will do what's called a trade-off on the conservation easement. We'll put the conservation land somewhere else, so therefore we haven't lost it, and we'll simply take it and we'll put some high-rises in that particular area. Each of these growth centers are looking to exploit what's close to rail lines or bus lines, even at the expense of conservation land.
Okay, so that's troubling. If I had an open piece of land next to my house and a developer wanted to put a high-rise on it, he could just say, that's a nice piece of land. I know it's a conservation piece of land. I know it belongs to a private owner, but I want it. And HUD will say, yes, you may have it.
Yes, because the agreement is that the state will adopt the livability principles. That's contractually now on every community.
So for $1.9 million to develop this plan, we gave away all the local communities' rights to govern how their community looks.
Exactly.
All right, and I don't know if people understand comprehensive plans, but I know in West Warwick, we just developed a comprehensive plan over the last 2 years. A group of people, residents of the town, came together about once a week, once every 2 weeks, and they worked on how our town would look into the future, where there would be commercial properties, industrial areas, retail areas, hopefully business areas, where different zoning lot sizes would be. It took them a long time. They put in parks and recreation areas. This RhodeMap Rhode Island could do away with all that hard work and do away with the vision, more importantly, the vision of how every community wants their town to look into the future.
Absolutely. There are lawsuits in federal court in other states right now. There are some down in Darien, Connecticut, that developers have brought to federal court that they demand certain development rights in certain communities, and it's no longer the planning board and the zoning board's responsibility to ease into these. It's simply they have to rubber stamp what these developers are asking for, and it's all under this umbrella of the HUD livability principles. In short, the livability principles supersede local planning and local zoning.
And Kevin Flynn, who is an appointed bureaucrat, signed with his signature and did away with local control in a lot of ways.
He's trying to deny that, but there was a hearing at the House Oversight Committee, and they basically asked that question of him, and he couldn't answer it. And the town of Barrington has asked that question, and they got back a letter from the state saying, we're not your attorney.
Yeah, I saw that letter where they said, give us some guidance. It looks to us like we just lost local control. And he's saying, well, you might have, you might not, ask your lawyer. Like every one of the 39 states now has to get an attorney to figure this out for them?
Well, you'd get 39 different opinions, depending upon which attorney was looking at it. It would have been better to regionalize that legal opinion and have the Division of Planning actually hire an attorney and say, okay, 39 communities, this is what your legal obligation is now under RhodeMap.
But maybe if you did that, there would be more people saying, no, stop, give it back.
Well, it's called damage control.
Damage control.
Yes.
Let's not give any answers, right? You talked about growth centers, and as I understand the growth center, it's supposed to be, they've actually planned out some of these growth centers, right?
Yes.
How many have already been planned?
Well, I don't know the exact number, but I look at the example of the growth center up in Smithfield on 116 and Route 7, the intersection there, which is
up by
where
Bryant
Bryant College.
And Fidelity there.
And so what they're looking at is implementing affordable housing first, and then hoping, crossing their fingers, so to speak, that businesses will follow. I see the growth center strategy more on build it and they will come. Build affordable housing in these growth centers by the thousands, and then cross your fingers that businesses will follow.
Why would businesses come? Why would they be attracted to low-income housing?
Well, there's no model that says a business would accept the rules and regulations that come with the growth centers. So again, it's an experiment. It's an experiment that hasn't been proven.
Businesses need a good workforce, diverse workforce with all levels of experience in it, right?
Yes.
They need electricity that is affordable. They need a regulatory system that is not onerous. They need certain things. How does a growth center get them those things?
Well, it doesn't. So, for example, if you were going to invest your capital in a growth center, one of the equations that you do is, what's the value of that 10, 15 years from now, and could I sell it if it wasn't working out? And anyone doing the math would say, this is uncertain. I don't know whether or not this investment will prove out over the longer term. So that's where I don't think any businessman would actually put faith that they could make money in any of these growth centers.
Yeah, so not only is it's not an economic development plan that looks into the future, what they have given us is totally unworkable from a business point of view. If I was going to put a manufacturing facility in a place so my workers, we're not mills anymore, cotton mills anymore, where people walk to work, right? And it's really not a society where the different skilled labor wants to all live together either. They want to live other places.
Mm-hmm. The Hershey, Pennsylvania, where the benefactor of the corporation built all the housing around it, and everybody was happy, and it worked. But that's not the model that we have today. And so they're trying to say that the model that was useful 200 years ago or 100 years ago can work again today. And
it's a different society.
It is.
All right, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back with some more. We'll talk a little bit more.
What do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore.
Are you kidding me? Representative Anastasia Williams of South Province has submitted Bill 5152 that would make it mandatory the Department of Children, Youth, and Families inspect vehicles transporting children. And if they think the vehicle is unsafe, they will supply transportation. Free cars. Are you kidding me?
Hi, welcome back to Common Sense. We're continuing our discussion now with Gary Morse, who has been studying RhodeMap Rhode Island. And if you've been listening to the last 3 segments, you know there's a lot in this plan for us to be really worried about. Gary, we've been talking about some of the things that RhodeMap imposes upon municipalities, on private ownership, quite frankly. How did this happen?
Well, that's a good question, and a lot of people have begun to ask that question, is how did the executive branch of government, which is not supposed to be making laws for the municipalities, how did they get the authority to sign commitments that the 39 municipalities would adopt all of these federal livability principles? And it's no longer by choice. In the past, before RhodeMap, these communities had a choice to make these
we had our own
directions.
comprehensive plans.
Yes.
It's Article something or other in the Constitution that gives us the right.
Now it is mandated that the local communities put in their comprehensive plans these HUD livability principles. Now,
And they can be sued by HUD if they don't.
they can be sued,
Eminent domain can be used.
yes. So it's a question that the Division of Planning owes to the legislature and to the communities. What legal obligations do they now have under federal law, under RhodeMap? And when they start researching that, I think they themselves will be surprised as to what they've signed up every community in Rhode Island for. And the residents of these communities have to wake up and say, is that going to hurt my property values? Are my property taxes going nothing but up? And is there any local control now that we have these HUD federal mandates hanging over us? People have to ask.
So, as I understand it, Governor Chafee appointed a group of people to the Planning Council, kind of directed them that he wanted this HUD principles of sustainable communities adopted, and they did. And now it's going to be imposed all the way down in all 39 cities and towns, all of our municipalities. And HUD is trying to be less than forthright until it's really embedded in the communities.
Well, the HUD is denying a lot of this as well, but in the past, a community had the right to either want to take HUD money or they could refuse to take HUD money. It looks like now they don't have that choice anymore. That
They
you're
have to
mandated,
do it.
You're mandated to comply with the HUD livability principles in such a way that it furthers HUD's ambitions for each neighborhood in the entire United States. And I use the word neighborhood. It's no longer the entire municipality. It's now down neighborhood by
You said the
neighborhood.
census tracts, it's
Yes.
just neighborhood.
Yes.
They look at it, see if there's enough minorities, what the economic composition is, and they say you need some affordable housing.
And you must have affordable
And you
housing.
must.
You are compelled.
What can people do if they want to stop this?
People now have to start asking the question, should we as a community opt out of RhodeMap Rhode Island? We don't know if that option is going to be available.
Well, we've only taken about $2 million so far, so maybe we could just give them that money back.
Well, that's an option.
Start over again with the real economic development plan.
I've wondered about the what I consider to be the nuclear option, which is for that some community actually sue the Division of Planning that they exceeded their authority by making law for the 39 communities. It's not in their jurisdiction to be.
Well, you're
commitments.
absolutely right. It never came before the legislature for us to vote on it, to properly vet what RhodeMap Rhode Island was and what the ramifications of that plan were. So even the representatives, the people, didn't have a chance to weigh in on it. This has just been done by bureaucrats, appointed people, not by elected people, not by vote. It's never been properly vetted, as I can see.
And it is a plan to deconstruct life as we know it in Rhode Island. And I think that kind of plan, that serious plan, needed to be vetted with the General Assembly. Many times. Many times,
as we were going along. I mean, it came out of the dark and was passed over a lot of objections. I mean, I went to that meeting and hundreds of people showed up and said, whoa, slow down. And they would not listen, right? Legislators came and said, we don't know what's in this plan yet. Let us look at it first. No. So a lot to be concerned about. People then should do what? They should talk to their town council people. What do you think are their most effective avenues?
I think they have to start showing up to the town council meetings and asking if the Division of Planning refuses to give an answer on what liabilities the residents now have under RhodeMap, that the towns begin to force that. And some of the activity right now is that many towns are coming back to the Division of Planning saying, okay, tell us the legal implications here.
Yes, and I can tell you that the Republicans have put in legislation that would allow any community to opt out of RhodeMap Rhode Island. So, and many have already said that they are against having RhodeMap Rhode Island, and they do want to opt out. So we're doing our part. We need to get that bill passed, though, so people could call their representatives, call their senators, call the speaker, call the Senate president, and say, pass this bill so my community can opt out of RhodeMap Rhode Island.
Well, I think that's a good start, probably the best start. And if we can't get legislation, I'm hoping some community will stand up and say, I'm going to get this resolved in Superior Court.
Get this resolved. I think rather than opting out, the whole state should opt out, quite frankly.
Yes.
We really need an economic development plan, not a fair housing plan.
Correct.
That's what gets Rhode Island moving. And the ultimate solution for everyone is to vote Republican. Thank you for coming and sharing this with us. I hope you have found some really good information here. I think everybody needs to really perk up, listen to what this RhodeMap Rhode Island is about, do your own research. This can be very damaging. It certainly isn't what we need in Rhode Island. We need economic development. We need companies to come here. And I think ultimately, as I said, the best solution is to elect Republicans. Thank you. See you next time.
Hello, Rhode Island. My name is Arthur C. Shopper. I am a local and national writer and radio host. Also a key contributor to 990WBOB.com based in Cranston, Rhode Island. And I'm reaching out to you through Common Sense Rhode Island to spread the conservative message, not just from the Ocean State, but across the country, even to the Golden State where I live. Tune in to the State of the Union. That's my radio show, State of the Union, from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Thursday. I talk about the local, the national, and the international news, plus my take on it. I'll be talking about Rhode Island, as well as California, and even what's going on in the world, too. So tune in every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can find my site at 990WBOB.com, at TwilightTalkRadio.com, and you call in at 424-243-9626. Make sure that you press 1. That's how you get in the queue.
Raimondo settles the union suit over pension reform? Let's start with a brief history lesson. Way back in the last administration, and by way back I mean 3 years ago, then General Treasurer Gina Raimondo submitted legislation that would reduce the estimated rate of return on state pension funds from 8.25% to 7.5%. In an era of 0% interest from the Federal Reserve, that change was a quarter measure at best, since it was still unrealistically high, like Fantasyland high. The same legislation also sought to cut back greatly on cost of living allowances for pensioners. The bills passed and it became the law of the land. Or so we thought, until the unions decided to sue. Now, I'm not an attorney, of course, but as I understand it, if that legislation was constitutional, then there's nothing to sue about. It passed. It's the law. So of course the state was in compliance. But this is Rhode Island, so the labor organizations were undeterred by that simple detail. Fast forward to today. Now, Governor Gina Raimondo has negotiated a settlement to the frivolous lawsuit that attended her much-touted pension reform legislation. Settled how? If any concessions were given to the unions, they were contrary to the law of the land. No? Here's a newsflash, ladies and gentlemen. So far in 2015, the pension fund has lost money. Or to put it another way, the fund today has fewer assets than it did on July 1st of last year. Do I need to repeat that for anyone? Governor Raimondo? Treasurer Chet Magaziner? Bueller? Anyone? Folks, this is not a political issue. It is a simple matter of arithmetic. It's been thousands of years since anyone got water out of a rock. The money for this does not exist. Are you kidding me?
Now, I love this time of year. We get our patients tested by that good government agency called the Internal Revenue Service. You may recall we threw lots of tea into Boston Harbor back in the early days, protesting, of course, what we colonials viewed as unfair taxation. Okay, so we got free of the mother country and moved on. Everything was going along quite nicely until 1863 happened. I'm sorry, 1862, now that I remember it. And that was the Civil War, of course. Now, the Civil War was not an inexpensive undertaking. So our government decided to raise the money to pay for that war by taxing income at 3%. And of course, this would be a temporary tax. Now, the rate was set at 3% for incomes between $800 and $10,000. And of course, those making the big money above the $10,000 level would pay at a 5% rate versus the 3%. Now, most of the wage-earning folks of that time actually didn't make enough money to pay any of this taxes. So they didn't qualify. Good. Now, that temporary tax stayed around until 1872. Some 7 years after the war ended. Surprise, surprise. Now, what happened next, you say? Well, things went along income tax free until the early 1900s. Government needs funds to do what it does. So, by 1913, the Congress drafted an amendment to the Constitution allowing for federal income taxes. And that would be the 16th Amendment. You were quite right. One little sidebar. Of the 48 states then existing, 42 of them ratified this amendment. Now, guess who didn't? That would be us. Rhode Island rejected that amendment. Always the contrarian. Remember, we didn't even sign the Constitution of these United States. So, how is the IRS doing these days? Well, they pocketed $2.4 trillion, I say again, $1 trillion from 234 million tax returns last year. Now, to do that, the IRS employed 89,500 of us to get the job done. And they needed a budget of approximately $11.2 billion to do it. So you have to spend a few billion to get a few trillion. We have all been assured that the system in place is a fair and balanced system. Every year our Congress reviews the bidding and invariably adds more rules to the law to make it work better. But it seems that everything is not humming along quite so fine as they would have us believe. There are some bad people out there who stole taxpayer identities and social security numbers and got serious refunds from the IRS. $4 billion, I say again, $1 billion of fraudulent 2012 tax returns got investigated by the IRS last year. Now, wouldn't it be great if the only tax we paid was income tax? But we also pay a bunch of other types of taxes. We get to pay excise tax, license taxes, intangible taxes, property taxes, estate taxes, which I'll talk about later, inheritance taxes, and that ever-present sales tax, which of course is 7% here. And if you are a corporation in Rhode Island, you get to pay one of the nation's highest state corporate taxes, a whopping 9%. It's only 8% in Massachusetts. Let's talk about why Rhode Island is at the top of the worst taxing states list. Let's begin with the income tax structure here in Rhode Island. We have a graduated income tax. That is, we pay taxes on income between 0 and $59,600 at a rate of 3.75%. Then the next $59,600 to up to $135,000, you pay 4.75 of that number, plus an additional $2,235 put on the top of it. And then if you are the CEO of a large company, and we do actually have a couple of those here in Rhode Island, and you have a bunch of bucks, you'll get taxed 5.99% for your earnings over $135,500. Plus, they top that off with a $5,840.25 fee. Great news. Probably better to move your company to Massachusetts, where the tax on earned income is a flat 5.15%. Now, here's another reason wealthy people move out of Rhode Island. What happens if you pass away as a resident of Rhode Island? There is something here we call the estate tax. It is based on the federal estate tax system, but has different rate structures. The current federal rate for estates could be as high as 40% of an estate greater than $5.4 million. That is, if you have a big house, large family business, whatever. What you plan to leave your heirs is now fair game to be taxed. Now, back in 1916, our government decided that World War I needed some financial support. So we started taxing these estates. Now, I read somewhere recently that since inception, estate tax revenue, which we still have, of course, since 1916, took $1.1 trillion of capital. That's money taken from family assets and given to the general treasury. Now, opponents of this death tax estimate that eliminating this tax would create 139,000 new jobs and increase paychecks by 0.7%. Listen up, Governor. Nice try if you think the feds are about to give this tax up. Now, what about the states? There are 35 states that do not have this particular tax. You know, the usual suspects. Florida, Texas, North Carolina, and a bunch of other red states. But here we have it. Now, the same people who are going to be paying large state income taxes are also those who may have to pay the estate tax. But here's the real rub in this state. The federal limit when estate taxes get paid is set at, as I said, $5.4 million. But that number is not universally used by those few states still having the estate tax. Some states use a much smaller number to start collecting from the estate. Here, in our tax-friendly state, we exempt only the first $1.5 million. From then on, you pay a graduated amount up to 16% above $10 million. Now, I decided I would play dead, not hard, and went to the tax.ri website and found that my loved ones would have to file a Rhode Island 100A as an alpha. Rhode Island tax return. Now, I saw it. There are 22 pages for this form that at the start cost you $50 to even file the tax form. Now, the rest of your cost is invariably going to be tied up in accountants and tax attorney fees. You know, this is the kind of nonsense that drives wealthy folks right out of town. Pay attention, Governor. Well, thank you for taking the time to tune us in, and God bless.